What if a simple cup of coffee costing just $4.75 could change your life forever? For Amelia Evans, a 28-year-old single mother and waitress buried under a mountain of debt, that's exactly what happened. She was down to her last $10, facing eviction with a sick child at home. But when an elderly, confused woman couldn't pay for her coffee, Amelia made a choice. She chose compassion over currency. She didn't know that a man sitting in the corner, one of the world's most reclusive billionaires, was watching her every move. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how one small act of kindness led to a reward so immense it's almost impossible to believe. The 5:15 a.m. alarm didn't so much wake Amelia Evans as it did summon her from a shallow, restless sleep. The shrill beep was the daily starting pistol for a race she felt she was always losing. Outside her small apartment window in the grey suburbs of Portland, a persistent September drizzle coated the world in a dreary sheen, a perfect reflection of the state of her life. She swung her legs out of bed, the worn floorboards cold against her feet. Her first stop was her son's room. 6-year-old Leo was asleep, his small chest rising and falling in a fragile rhythm. A blue inhaler lay on his bedside table, a constant plastic reminder of the medical bills that were stacked on her kitchen counter like a threatening monolith. Leo's asthma was a shadow that followed them everywhere, triggered by the damp chill of their poorly insulated apartment, the stress in his mother's voice, the very air of their poverty. In the kitchen, the reality of her finances hit her, as it did every morning. She opened the refrigerator. A half-empty carton of milk, 3 eggs, a wilting lettuce head, and a jar of pickles. That was it. Her gaze drifted to the counter, past the pile of bills to a bright red final notice envelope from their landlord, Mr. Gable. It lay there like a venomous snake, its contents promising homelessness if she couldn't produce $1,200 in overdue rent by the end of the week. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at her chest. She took a deep breath, mimicking the breathing exercises she taught Leo when his own chest tightened. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She checked her purse, a worn-out leather bag she'd had since high school. Her fingers fumbled inside, pushing past old receipts and a stray crayon until they found her wallet. She opened it. A single $10 bill and a handful of change. That was it. That was all she had to her name until her paycheck on Friday, which was already entirely spoken for by the landlord, the pharmacy, and the electric company. $10 to last her and Leo for the next 3 days. "It's okay," she whispered to the empty kitchen, a mantra of defiance against the crushing weight. "We'll make it. We always do." Amelia was a dreamer trapped in a realist's nightmare. She had once enrolled in the Oregon Culinary Institute, her heart set on becoming a pastry chef. She could close her eyes and smell the buttery bliss of a perfect croissant, feel the delicate art of piping buttercream, the science of a flawless macaron. But then she'd gotten pregnant. Leo's father had vanished like a ghost, and the dream had been shelved, gathering dust behind the harsh reality of waitressing shifts at the Daily Grind, a downtown coffee shop that was anything but glamorous. She scribbled a quick note for Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman next door, who watched Leo before his school bus arrived. "Leo has his lunch. Please make sure he uses his inhaler before he leaves. I love you, little lion. Be brave." "Mom," she kissed his forehead, his hair smelling of sweet, innocent sleep, and felt a surge of love so fierce it almost brought her to her knees. It was this love that fueled her, that pushed her out the door into the rain, that made her face another 10-hour shift of forced smiles and aching feet. Her 2002 Honda Civic, affectionately and ironically named the Prince, sputtered in protest before finally turning over with a rattling cough. The gas light was on. It had been on for 2 days. She drove with a featherlight touch on the accelerator, praying she'd make it downtown. As she pulled into the staff parking lot behind the daily grind, the $10 bill in her wallet felt less like money and more like a lifeline. It was gas money. It was milk money. It was the only tangible thing standing between her and absolute zero. The race had begun, and she was already out of breath. The daily grind was a study in contrasts. The air was thick with the rich, comforting aroma of freshly ground espresso beans and toasted bagels, a scent of luxury and leisure. But for the staff, the reality was a frantic ballet of clattering ceramic, hissing steam wands and the relentless chime of the order bell. Amelia's manager, Mr. Henderson, was a man whose personality was as bitter as burnt coffee. He was a stickler for rules, a micromanager who believed a happy employee was an unproductive one. "Evans, you're 3 minutes late," he grumbled, without looking up from his clipboard as she tied her stained brown apron around her waist. "Car trouble, Mr. Henderson." "I'm sorry," she lied smoothly. The truth that she'd spent 3 minutes trying to coax the will to live back into her car's engine wasn't an acceptable excuse. "Just get on the floor. Section C is yours, and for God's sake try to upsell the pumpkin spice muffins. They're a day old." Amelia plastered on her customer service smile and got to work. The morning rush was a blur of orders, refills, and clearing tables. She moved with an efficiency born of years of practice, her mind a calculator of tips and tables, always trying to stay one step ahead. Around 10:30 a.m. As the initial chaos subsided into a steady hum, an elderly woman shuffled in. She was small and frail, wrapped in a faded lilac coat that seemed a size too big for her. Her white hair was a bit disheveled, and her eyes, a pale, watery blue, seemed to be looking at the world from a great distance. She chose a small table in Amelia's section, a two-top in the corner by the window, where the rain traced sad, meandering paths down the glass. Amelia approached with her notepad. "Good morning. What can I get for you today?" The woman looked up, her gaze unfocused for a moment, before landing on Amelia. "Oh, hello, dear. I'd just like a coffee. Black, please, and perhaps one of those nice-looking scones." "The blueberry scone is fresh out of the oven," Amelia offered with a genuine smile. It was a small, harmless lie. They were from yesterday, just like the muffins, but the woman looked like she needed something warm and comforting. "Oh, that would be lovely," the woman said, her voice soft and papery. Amelia brought the coffee and scone over a few minutes later. The woman was staring out the window, a wistful, lost expression on her face. "Here you are," Amelia said, gently placing the items on the table. "Let me know if you need anything else." The woman, whose name Amelia would later learn, was Elspeth, stayed for over an hour. She drank her coffee in slow, deliberate sips, breaking off tiny pieces of the scone and eating them one by one. She didn't read a book or look at a phone. She just sat a quiet island of stillness in the cafe's gentle bustle. Amelia kept an eye on her refilling her coffee once without being asked. There was a vulnerability about her that reminded Amelia of her own grandmother in her final years, a sense of being slightly untethered from the world. During a lull, Amelia watched as the woman began to gather her things. She fumbled in her large, worn handbag, her brow furrowing in concentration. She pulled out a tube of lipstick a set of keys, a pair of reading glasses, and a crumpled tissue. She upended the bag, her search growing more frantic. Her breathing quickened, a soft, panicked sound. Mr. Henderson noticed from behind the counter. "Evans, is your table in Section C going to pay, or just camp out all day?" He called, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Amelia walked over to the table, a sense of dread pooling in her stomach. "Is everything all right, Ma'am?" Elspeth looked up, her pale blue eyes swimming with tears. I can't find my purse. My wallet. I'm sure I had it when I left the house. My son Robert, he always tells me to double-check. But I get so forgetful." Her voice cracked, and her hands trembled. "I am so sorry. I don't know what to do." The simple declaration of a lost wallet hung in the air, a minor inconvenience for most. But for this woman, it was a moment of profound shame and fear. She looked utterly humiliated, her dignity crumbling before Amelia's eyes. Mr. Henderson lumbered over his face, a mask of impatience. "Is there a problem here? She's just misplaced her wallet, Mr. Henderson," Amelia said quickly, trying to shield the old woman from his accusatory glare. "Misplaced it or forgot it?" He sneered, his eyes narrowing. "Listen, lady, this isn't a charity. The bill is $4.75. Coffee and a scone. You either pay it or I'm calling the police." The word police made Elspeth flinch as if she'd been struck. The color drained from her face and her trembling intensified. "Oh no, please, there's no need for that. I can call my son. I just need to remember his number. It's so hard to remember things these days." She began to weep silently, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks into the folds of her coat. The scene was excruciating. Other customers were starting to stare. Amelia felt a hot flush of anger toward her boss and a deep, aching empathy for the woman before her. She saw her own grandmother in those tear-filled eyes. She saw the fear of being old, confused, and alone. In that instant, a choice presented itself, clear and absolute. In her pocket, inside her worn wallet, was the $10 bill. Her lifeline, her gas money, Leo's milk money. Every rational thought screamed at her to stay out of it. It wasn't her problem. She had her own crises, to manage her own child to feed. Survival instinct was a powerful primal force. But then she looked at Elspeth, so frail and frightened, being publicly shamed over less than $5. She thought of Leo, and the world she wanted him to grow up, in a world where people helped each other, where kindness wasn't transactional. What was the point of struggling to survive if you lost the best parts of your humanity along the way? The internal battle lasted only a heartbeat. "It's okay, Mr. Henderson. I've got it," Amelia said, her voice firm and clear. Henderson turned to her, his eyebrows raised in disbelief. "You've got it, Evans. You can barely afford your bus pass." "I said I've got it," she repeated, pulling the $10 bill from her wallet. The crisp note felt like a lead weight in her hand. She walked to the register, the eyes of the other patrons following her. She rang up the sale, $4.75, and placed her lifeline into the cash drawer. The machine dinged, and she handed the change, $5.25, back to herself, a bizarre and heartbreaking transaction. She walked back to the table and knelt beside the still crying woman. "It's all taken care of," she said, softly placing a hand on Elspeth's arm. "Please don't you worry about a thing." Elspeth looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and profound gratitude. "But you shouldn't have. That was your money." "It's just coffee," Amelia said with a shrug, trying to make the gesture seem smaller than it felt. My treat. Do you need me to help you call your son, or would you like me to call a taxi for you? Oh no, dear. Thank you. You've done more than enough, Elspeth whispered, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She squeezed Amelia's hand tightly. You have a good heart. A very, very good heart. Thank you. With a final grateful look, Elspeth gathered her handbag and slowly made her way out of the coffee shop, disappearing into the grey, rainy street. Amelia watched her go, a hollow feeling in her stomach. She was now down to $5 and some change. She didn't know how she was going to get gas for her car to get home. But as she cleared the empty coffee cup and the plate with a few scone crumbs, she felt something else too. A quiet, unshakable sense that she had done the right thing. She was completely unaware that from another corner table, a man had watched the entire sordid drama unfold. He sat alone, nursing a single espresso. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored grey suit. But he had a way of being unremarkable, of blending into the background. He hadn't looked at his phone once. His gaze had been fixed on the interaction, his expression unreadable. He had seen Mr. Henderson's cruelty, Elspeth's distress, and Amelia's quiet, costly grace. The man in the grey suit was Julian Ashworth. To the world he was a ghost, a legend in the tech and finance industries. He was a billionaire many times over, the architect of a software empire that quietly powered global logistics. But he was also intensely private, his face rarely appearing in newspapers or on television. He valued his anonymity above all else, allowing him to move through the world as an observer, not a spectacle. He hadn't intended to be at the daily grind. He had been in Portland for a series of tense, high-stakes meetings. But that morning he'd received a call that had frozen the blood in his veins. It was from the live-in caregiver for his mother, Elspeth. She had been distraught. Elspeth, who was in the early stages of Alzheimer's, had slipped out of the house while the caregiver was on the phone. She had been gone for over an hour. Julian had immediately cancelled his meetings and started driving the streets of his mother's neighborhood, his heart pounding with a dread he hadn't felt in years. He knew her habits. He knew she loved quiet coffee shops, a holdover from her life before the disease began its cruel theft of her memories. He'd been checking every café in a 5-mile radius. Seeing her through the window of the daily grind, seemingly safe, had brought a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees. He had decided to watch her for a moment before going in to give her a sense of independence. But then he saw the scene at the counter unfold. He watched as his mother, the proud, elegant woman who had raised him, fumbled in her bag. Her mind clouded by confusion. He felt a hot spike of rage at the manager's callousness. His threat to call the police on a bewildered old woman. And then he saw Amelia. He saw the waitress who looked tired and stressed step in without hesitation. He saw her face as she made the decision, the quick flash of conflict followed by a resolute calm. He saw her use what was likely her own grocery money to protect his mother's dignity. It was a raw, unperformative act of human decency, the kind he rarely witnessed in his world of calculated transactions and strategic philanthropy. It was pure. He felt a profound sense of shame that a stranger had shown his mother more compassion in that moment than he had in months. He had been so consumed by his work, he'd left her care to others, assuaging his guilt with money. This young woman, who clearly had so little, had given what she couldn't afford. As Amelia cleared his mother's table, Julian discreetly flagged her down. "Check, please," he said, his voice quiet and even. "Of course," Amelia replied, her professional smile back in place, though her eyes looked strained. She brought the check for his $3.50 espresso. Julian placed his credit card on the small tray, a black, featureless card made of anodized metal. Along with it, he took a crisp $100 bill from his wallet and placed it on top. Then he paused. $100 felt like an insult. It was a rich man's casual tip, a gesture that cost him nothing. It didn't reflect the magnitude of what he had just seen. He put the 100 back in his wallet. He took out his pen, and on the tip line of the receipt, he wrote in a clear, steady hand, $1,000. Below it on the signature line, he simply signed J. Ashworth. He added a small note at the bottom, "For your kindness." He stood up, placed the receipt folder on the table, and walked out of the cafe without a backward glance, his mind already formulating a much grander plan. A few minutes later, Amelia came to clear the table. She picked up the folder expecting a few dollars at most. When she opened it, she froze. Her eyes scanned the numbers again and again, convinced it was a mistake. $1,000, a comma, and 2 zeros. It couldn't be real. People didn't leave $1,000 tips on a $3 coffee. Maybe he meant $1,000, and his decimal point was in the wrong place. Her hands trembled as she showed it to Sarah, the other waitress on duty. "No way." Sarah breathed her eyes wide. "Amelia, that's $1,000. Amelia took the receipt to Mr. Henderson, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Henderson, I think this customer made a mistake." Henderson snatched the slip from her. He stared at it, his jaw tightening with envy. He ran the card. The transaction went through instantly. Approved. "No mistake," he grunted, handing the slip back to her. "The house policy is that credit card tips are paid out in cash at the end of the shift. Don't expect this to happen again." For the rest of the day, Amelia moved in a daze. $1,000. It was a miracle. It was more than a miracle. It was a lifeline. It was rent. It was medicine for Leo. It was groceries. It was a full tank of gas. It was a buffer against the terror that woke her up every morning. As she drove home that evening, after stopping to fill her gas tank for the first time in months, she cried tears of pure, unadulterated relief. She thought of the quiet man in the grey suit. She didn't know who he was, but she sent a silent thank you out into the universe. She had no idea that the $1,000 tip was not the end of the story. It wasn't even the beginning. It was just an opening gesture. The next 2 days were the first in years that Amelia felt she could breathe. The $1,000 safely deposited in her bank account had silenced the screaming alarms in her head. She had paid Mr. Gable the overdue rent, bought Leo a week's worth of healthy groceries, refilled his prescriptions, and even treated him to a new set of Legos. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark in the overwhelming darkness. She had told the story of the generous tipper to Leo, framing it as a fairy tale. A kind man saw Mummy do a kind thing, and he gave her a magical reward, she'd explained. Leo, busy building a spaceship, had simply nodded. To a child, magic was an everyday occurrence. It was a Saturday afternoon, her day off. The rain had finally stopped, and a weak autumn sun was filtering through the clouds. Amelia was on the floor of the living room with Leo helping him find the right piece for his Lego creation, when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from their apartment door. It wasn't Mr. Gable's lazy, shuffling knock, or Mrs. Peterson's gentle tap. This was different. It was precise and commanding. Amelia's heart gave a nervous flutter. She opened the door a crack. Standing in the hallway was a man who looked distinctly out of place in their run-down apartment building. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark navy blue suit that was clearly bespoke. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he held a sleek leather briefcase. He looked like he had just stepped out of a boardroom on Wall Street. "Amelia Evans?" he asked. His voice was polite, but carried an air of no-nonsense professionalism. "Yes," Amelia said, clutching the doorknob. "My name is Marcus Davies. I am a representative for Mr. Julian Ashworth. May I have a moment of your time?" The name meant nothing to her. She thought back to the credit card slip. J. Ashworth. A jolt went through her. This had to be about the tip. Maybe he wanted it back. Maybe it really was a mistake. The familiar dread returned cold and sickening. Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Davies offered a small, reassuring smile. "Quite the opposite, Miss Evans. Mr. Ashworth was very impressed by your conduct the other day at the Daily Grind. He has asked to meet with you." Amelia stared at him, bewildered. "Meet with me? Why?" He would prefer to explain that himself. "He has sent a car for you. It's waiting downstairs. He understands this is highly unusual, but he has assured me it is a matter of great importance. You will not be inconvenienced, and you will be returned home within 2 hours." He glanced past her at Leo. "Your son is welcome to come, of course. There is a tablet with games and cartoons for him in the car." Amelia's mind was reeling. A car. A meeting. A man named Julian Ashworth. It felt like a scene from a movie. Part of her wanted to slam the door and hide. It was too strange, too far outside the realm of her reality. But another part, the part that was desperately tired of her current life, was intrigued. What did she have to lose? "Okay," she heard herself say. "Just give me a minute to get our shoes." 15 minutes later, Amelia was sitting in the back of a black Mercedes-Benz S-Class sedan. The interior smelled of clean leather and was so quiet it felt like being in a different world. Leo was beside her headphones on, completely absorbed in a game on a brand-new iPad that had been waiting for him on the seat. They drove away from her familiar, struggling neighborhood and into the heart of downtown Portland, pulling up in front of the Ashworth Tower, the city's tallest and most prestigious skyscraper. It was a gleaming edifice of glass and steel that scraped the sky. Amelia had served coffee to hundreds of people who worked in that building, but she had never imagined she would one day walk through its imposing front doors. Mr. Davies led them to a private elevator. He pressed a button for the penthouse floor, a floor with no number, just a single gold star. As the elevator ascended silently and swiftly, Amelia felt a growing sense of vertigo that had nothing to do with the height. Her life, it seemed, was about to change. She just had no idea how profoundly. The private elevator ascended the Ashworth Tower in an unnerving, whisper-soft silence. There was no gentle hum of machinery, no music, just a seamless, swift climb that made Amelia's ears pop. With each passing floor, she felt as if she were leaving her own world further and further below, rising into an atmosphere too thin for her to breathe. She clutched Leo's hand. His small, warm fingers, a grounding anchor in the dizzying unreality of the moment. She felt profoundly out of place in her slightly faded jeans, and the best sweater she owned, a simple grey knit that suddenly felt shabby and worn. The elevator doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into the sky. That was the first impression a room made of air and light. A sprawling office that was less a workspace and more a testament to power occupying the entire top floor. The floor-to-ceiling windows on all sides offered a godlike 360-degree view of Portland. The Willamette River snaked below like a silver ribbon, and the distant peak of Mount Hood stood sharp and majestic against the clear autumn sky. The space was furnished with a stark, elegant minimalism, a massive desk of polished chrome and dark wood that seemed to float a seating area with low-slung leather sofas and a single dramatic sculpture of twisted bronze that dominated one corner. A man stood by the far window, his back to them, silhouetted against the breathtaking vista. He was looking out over the city, his hands clasped behind his back. As the elevator doors chimed softly, he turned. It was a jolt, a sudden sharp intake of breath for Amelia. It was him, the quiet man from the coffee shop. But the man who stood before her now was not the unassuming customer in the simple grey suit. In this space, his element, he was transformed. Dressed in a crisp white shirt and perfectly tailored dark trousers, he radiated a quiet, formidable confidence that seemed to charge the very air around him. The anonymity he had worn in the café was gone, replaced by an aura of immense authority. "Miss Evans, Amelia, thank you for coming," he said. His voice was the same, come even and resonant. He offered a surprisingly warm smile that didn't quite reach his intense, observant eyes. He then crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to Leo's level. "And you must be Leo. I hear you're quite the Lego master. Is it true you built a Mark 47 Star Blaster with a custom hyperdrive?" Leo, who had been hiding behind his mother's leg, peeked out, his eyes wide with astonishment. "How do you know? A good commander knows the talents of his allies," Julian said with a straight face. "Mr. Davies, my chief of staff here, has a collection of architectural models in the adjoining room that might interest you. There's a scale model of the entire city of Tokyo. I think you'll find its structural integrity impressive." The invitation, spoken in a language Leo understood perfectly, worked like a charm. As Mr. Davies led a now chattering Leo into an adjacent room, the heavy glass door sliding shut behind them, an intense silence fell. The vast office suddenly felt smaller. The space between Amelia and Julian Ashworth charged with unanswered questions. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the leather sofas. Amelia perched on the edge of the cushion, her back ramrod straight. "Mr. Ashworth," she began, her voice coming out stronger than she expected. "I came because I assume this is about the tip you left. It was an incredible gesture, but it was far too much. I can't possibly keep it. I think you must have made a mistake." He sat in the chair opposite her, not behind his desk, a choice that made the encounter feel more personal and somehow more intimidating. He shook his head slowly. "The only mistake I made that day, Amelia was not leaving more. The $1,000 was an impulse, a paltry, inadequate gesture. What I want to talk to you about is something far more significant. But first, I owe you an explanation and an apology." Amelia stared at him, completely baffled. An apology? For what? He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees, and his gaze was so direct it felt as though he could see every worry and fear she'd ever had. "The elderly woman at the coffee shop. The woman you helped. Her name is Elspeth Ashworth." He paused, letting the name hang in the air for a beat. "She is my mother." The word struck Amelia with the force of a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt, the stunning view outside, blurring into a meaningless swirl of color. His mother. The frail, confused woman in the lilac coat was the mother of this powerful, enigmatic billionaire. The scene from the café replayed in her mind, now cast in a completely different, surreal light. The manager's cruelty, the woman's tears, her own small act of charity. All of it had been witnessed by the woman's son, a man who could likely buy the entire city block without a second thought. She has early-onset Alzheimer's. Julian continued, his voice losing its corporate polish, becoming softer laced with a raw, personal pain. Who she is. It comes and goes in waves. Before this disease began its cruel theft, she was the sharpest, most vibrant woman I knew. She taught literature at Reed College. She could quote Shakespeare and argue politics with a fear that could intimidate senators. Now, some days she forgets my name. He looked away towards the window, and Amelia saw not a billionaire, but just a son struggling with a grief that had no end. That morning, she slipped out of her home. Her caregiver called me in a panic. I spent 2 hours driving the streets, my mind imagining every worst-case scenario. When I finally saw her through the window of your coffee shop, the relief I felt was indescribable. But it was immediately followed by a profound sense of shame. He met her eyes again, and his were filled with self-recrimination. I watched that manager threaten her. I watched him publicly humiliate my mother, the woman who raised me, who taught me about dignity and compassion. And I did nothing. I sat there frozen in my corner, worried about causing a scene, about being recognized. In my world, every action is calculated. Every move has a ripple effect. I've become so accustomed to strategy that I've forgotten how to simply act. You didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate. You saw a person in pain, and you helped. He shook his head, a look of genuine wonder on his face. After I left, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had my people discreetly look into your situation. I hope you can forgive the intrusion, but I needed to understand. I needed to know the true cost of that coffee to you. When I learned about your son's medical needs, the overdue rent, your dream of culinary school that you had to abandon, I realized you didn't just give my mother $5. You gave her your security for the week. You gave her Leo's grocery money. You sacrificed a piece of your own survival for a stranger. He stood up and began to pace slowly, his footsteps silent on the plush rug. It strikes me as a profound and terrible injustice that someone with a heart like yours should have to live in a state of constant struggle, while I, who sat by and did nothing, live like this. He swept a hand around the opulent room. This is all meaningless if it can't honor what truly matters. And what truly matters is human decency. What you showed my mother. He stopped in front of her, his expression resolute. I can't undo the difficulties you've faced, but I can change your future. I can fix this one small, absurd imbalance in the universe. I want to offer you something, Amelia, not as charity, not as a gift. Consider it a reward. A thank you from the very bottom of a son's grateful heart for being kind to his mother when he wasn't brave enough to be. He took a deep breath, and the final words landed with the weight of destiny. I want to give you a house. Amelia stared at Julian Ashworth, the words, I want to give you a house, echoing in the cavernous silence of the penthouse office. Her brain, conditioned by years of scarcity and disappointment, simply refused to process them. The statement was so far beyond the realm of possibility that her first fleeting thought was that this was some kind of elaborate, cruel joke. Her second thought was that this quiet, powerful man was certifiably insane. A short, hysterical laugh escaped her lips before she could stifle it. A house, she repeated the words, sounding absurd and foreign on her tongue. Mr. Ashworth, with all due respect, People don't just give other people houses, especially not for a cup of coffee. It was never about the coffee, Amelia, Julian said, his voice patient and unwavering, as if he had anticipated her disbelief. And yes, they do, when the reason is important enough. He stood and walked back to the panoramic window, gesturing for her to join him. Reluctantly, as if in a trance, she rose and stood beside him, the entire city sprawling beneath them, like a map of a life she was no longer a part of. He pointed towards a cluster of deep green hills southwest of the city, an exclusive old money area known for its beautiful sprawling properties and canopies of ancient Douglas firs. "It's on Hawthorne Hill," he said, his voice taking on a softer, more nostalgic tone. "My father built it. He was a carpenter before he was a businessman, and he put his soul into that place. I can still smell the sawdust. My mother planted the climbing roses on the front trellis herself." He paused, lost in a memory. "It's been empty for years, ever since my father passed, and I moved my mother to a more manageable single-story residence closer to her doctors. It's a place filled with memories, but it has become a monument, a museum. It's been silent for too long. A house like that, it has a spirit, and its spirit is dying. It needs laughter. It needs the smell of baking bread. It needs a family. It needs to be a home again." He turned to look at her, and the sincerity in his eyes was so profound, it made her want to look away. "I saw you with your son, Amelia. I see the way you fight for him. That house has 5 bedrooms, a garden big enough for a dozen 6-year-olds to wage epic adventures in, and a kitchen that a certain aspiring pastry chef could only dream of." He gave her a small, knowing smile. "I know about your dream, Amelia, the one you had to put on hold. It's not right that a dream like that should die because the world is hard." Tears began to well in Amelia's eyes, hot and overwhelming. This was too much. It was a fantasy, a daydream made real, and she felt a terrifying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped away and she was floating. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't possibly accept something like this. It's too much." "Is it?" he countered gently, his gaze piercing. "Let me be frank. I'm a man who deals in numbers that have lost all meaning. I can move markets with a phone call. I can buy and sell companies like they're chess pieces. But for all that power, I couldn't protect my own mother from being humiliated in a coffee shop. For all my wealth, I couldn't buy her dignity back in that moment. But you did. With $4.75 you couldn't afford to spend." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intense confidential level. "What is the value of a mother's dignity? To me it is infinite. You showed up for her when I didn't. You treated her like a human being, not an inconvenience. Amelia, what you see out this window, this company, this tower, all of it, it means nothing to me compared to her. You gave me back a piece of my faith in humanity. What is an empty house, a house that brings me more sadness than joy right now, compared to that door?" Just then Mr. Davies re-entered the room, followed by a wide-eyed Leo. "He has a whole city made of Legos," Leo exclaimed, running to Amelia and wrapping his arms around her legs, oblivious to the monumental conversation he had just interrupted. Julian's intense expression softened instantly as he knelt to Leo's level. "You like it? That's my model of downtown Tokyo. Maybe you can build one just like it in your new playroom." He then straightened up and took a simple, elegant black folder from Mr. Davies, handing it to Amelia. Her hands trembled so much she could barely take it. "Inside," he said, "is the deed to the house at 714 Hawthorne Crest Drive. It has been transferred to your name, effective immediately. It is, of course, mortgage-free. The property taxes have been prepaid for the next 20 years through a trust. Also inside is a financial portfolio managed by Mr. Davies, which will provide you with a substantial annual income. You will never have to worry about a rent notice or a medical bill again. And finally, there is a letter of acceptance and a fully funded open-ended scholarship for you to re-enroll at the Oregon Culinary Institute. Start next semester or 10 years from now. It will be there when you are ready." With trembling fingers, Amelia opened the folder. She saw her name, Amelia Rose Evans, on official-looking documents. She saw the address. She saw financial statements with numbers so large they seemed typographical errors. It was real. This was all real. The dam of composure she had maintained for years finally broke. The tears she had been holding back began to fall freely silent, hot tracks of relief and disbelief. All the nights she had cried herself to sleep, worrying about money, all the days she had spent on her aching feet, all the fear and the struggle, it was all washing away in this surreal, impossible moment. "There is one condition," Julian said, his voice gentle. Amelia looked up, her heart skipping a beat, a flicker of suspicion returning. There was always a catch. "The garden has a beautiful old stone bench under a weeping willow tree. My mother and I used to sit there for hours. I would ask that once a week, perhaps on Sunday afternoons, you allow an old woman and her son to come and sit on that bench for a while. She may not remember you, Amelia. Her memory is fading. But I will. I will always remember what you did for us." Overwhelmed by the simplicity and sincerity of his request, Amelia could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. That evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a different car, a discreet but luxurious SUV driven by Mr. Davies, took Amelia and Leo away from the gleaming tower. They drove away from the noise and grime of her part of the city, climbing into the quiet, winding roads of Hawthorne Hill. The air grew cleaner, scented with pine and damp earth. Massive trees formed a canopy over the road, and beautiful stately homes sat nestled behind old stone walls. "Are we going to a castle, Mummy?" Leo asked, his face pressed against the window. "Something like that. My love," Amelia whispered, her own eyes wide with wonder. Mr. Davies turned onto a private lane marked Hawthorne Crest Drive. He stopped before a set of wrought-iron gates which swung open silently. They proceeded up a long, curving driveway, lined with towering trees. And then the house came into view. It wasn't a sterile, modern mansion of glass and steel. It was a masterpiece of stone and dark timber, with a steep, slate-tiled roof and ivy climbing the walls. Every window was lit from within, casting a warm, welcoming glow that seemed to push back the twilight. It didn't look like a house. It looked like a home that had been waiting for them. Mr. Davies parked the car and came around to open her door. He handed her a single, heavy, ornate brass key. "Welcome home, Miss Evans." Amelia took the key, its weight a solid, tangible anchor in the swirling sea of her emotions. She walked with Leo to the massive oak front door. For a moment, she just stood there, her hand hovering over the keyhole. This was the threshold between her old life and her new one. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she slid the key into the lock and turned. The door swung open into a grand foyer with a soaring ceiling and a gracefully curving staircase. The air inside smelled of beeswax old wood and a faint, pleasant scent of dried lavender. Directly ahead, through a wide archway, was a sunken living room where a fire was already crackling merrily in a floor-to-ceiling stone fireplace. The room was filled with deep, comfortable-looking sofas, and the walls were lined with built-in bookshelves groaning with hundreds of books. On the mantelpiece, amongst tasteful decorations, were framed family photos. A smiling couple on their wedding day. A young boy with a gap-toothed grin, holding a fish. Julian. Wow. Leo breathed, his small voice echoing in the grand space. He let go of her hand and ran into the living room, his sneakers squeaking on the polished hardwood floors. Amelia followed him, her hand trailing along the smooth, cool plaster of the wall. She saw that the welcome basket from Julian's office was on the coffee table next to a perfectly constructed Lego spaceship. Mr. Davies smiled. Mr. Ashworth arranged for a few essentials. The pantry and refrigerator are fully stocked. He thought you shouldn't have to worry about groceries for your first few nights. He then led her towards the back of the house. I believe this is the room you'll be most interested in. He pushed open a swinging door, and Amelia gasped. It was the kitchen from her dreams. It was enormous, with a massive marble-topped island in the center. A professional 6-burner Wolf range sat against one wall with a set of gleaming copper pots and pans hanging from a rack above it. The refrigerator was a restaurant-grade glass-doored Sub-Zero. She ran her hand over the cool marble, her fingertips tracing the grey veins in the stone. She imagined rolling out dough for croissants, piping delicate macarons, the scent of vanilla and caramel filling this incredible space. For the first time, her dream didn't feel like a dusty, forgotten relic. It felt like a promise. They explored the rest of the house. There was a cozy library, a formal dining room, and 4 guest bedrooms, each beautifully appointed. Finally, Mr. Davies led them up the stairs to a room at the end of the hall. The door was painted a cheerful sky blue. He opened it to reveal a child's paradise. The walls were covered in a hand-painted mural of planets and stars. A bed was shaped like a rocket ship, and in the corner, a massive table was covered with what seemed like every Lego set in existence. Leo let out a squeal of pure joy and dove right in. The last room was the master suite. It was a sanctuary of calm, decorated in soft creams and blues, with a large bed piled high with pillows and a fluffy duvet. French doors led out to a small stone balcony. Amelia stepped outside into the crisp night air. The balcony overlooked the expansive backyard garden, which was bathed in the soft glow of landscape lighting. And there, just as Julian had described, was a majestic weeping willow tree, its long branches gently swaying in the breeze. Beneath it sat a simple, weathered stone bench. Standing there, listening to the joyful sounds of her son playing in his new room, surrounded by a peace and security she had never known, the full reality of the day washed over her. It had all started with a choice, a $4 choice made from the heart. She hadn't known she was being watched. She hadn't expected a reward. But in a world that so often felt cold and transactional, her one small act of grace had rippled outwards, touching the heart of a lonely billionaire and changing her life and her son's life forever. The crushing weight she had carried on her shoulders for years was gone, replaced by a feeling so light it felt like she could fly. It wasn't just freedom. It was a new beginning, a blank page, a chance to finally build the life she had only ever dared to dream of. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that we are all connected in ways we can't possibly imagine. Her journey from the brink of eviction to a life of security wasn't luck. It was the direct result of a single, compassionate choice. In a moment of crisis, when it would have been easier to look away, she chose to see another person's pain and act. She didn't know the elderly woman was a billionaire's mother, and it didn't matter. She treated her with kindness because it was the right thing to do. This story proves that the ripples of our actions, no matter how small, can travel farther than we think. You never know whose life you might touch, or how that single act of grace might come back to you. So if Amelia's incredible true life story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that goodness still exists in the world. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more inspiring stories that prove one person can and does make a difference. What's the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you? Let us know in the comments below.